He returns after 5 years. The woman at the door isn't broken. She's radiant, whole, complete. As he watches her lovingly feed an elderly neighbor who can't hold a spoon, he finally sees the truth. He lost the most extraordinary woman alive. The gravel road stretched ahead like an open wound across the Tennessee countryside. Robert gripped the steering wheel, feeling each pothole shake not just his sedan, but something deep inside his chest. Cold air blasted from the vents, contrasting sharply with the heat rising from the red earth. That shimmering haze made everything blur. Or perhaps it was just his vision, clouded by tears he refused to let fall. 5 years. 5 years since he'd driven this road in the opposite direction, carrying suitcases stuffed with ambition and a heart emptied of patience. He'd left behind a woman who loved him, and a life he'd considered too small. "You don't need all that, Robert," Helen's voice echoed in his memory. "We have enough. We have each other." But enough had never existed in his vocabulary. He'd wanted more. Always more. Money, recognition, power. And Helen, with her simple dresses and quiet smile, had seemed like an obstacle to everything he believed he deserved. His heart hammered as he spotted the first gate, palms sweating despite the artificial chill surrounding him. He'd rehearsed this moment hundreds of times during the drive, but now every prepared word scattered like startled birds. What would he say? "Hi, Helen. I was wrong." Everything sounded pathetic, desperate, true. He parked beneath a sprawling oak tree, the same spot where they used to leave their old pickup. The property looked different, yet strangely familiar. Organized flower beds replaced wild weeds. A new greenhouse stood near the house. Chickens roamed freely. Everything breathed care, attention, love. Robert sat frozen, watching the simple white wooden house. Rocking chairs on the porch that hadn't existed before. Colorful flower pots everywhere. It was modest, yet there was beauty here his $1 million penthouse had never achieved. He took a deep breath. His hands trembled opening the door. Heat struck him like a physical blow, but it wasn't just the climate. It was reality settling in. He walked slowly along the stone path. Each step weighed 1,000 pounds. Memories bombarded him. "I'm going to build an empire, Helen. But I don't want an empire, honey. I want you. You don't understand. You never will." Those words were knives in his chest now. How had he been so blind, so cruel? He'd achieved everything. The company had prospered beyond expectations. 3 offices, expensive cars, designer clothes, a penthouse. But he came home every night to silence. Woke every morning in Egyptian cotton sheets and felt cold. Sat in important meetings and realized he didn't care about any of it. Loneliness has a specific sound. Echo of footsteps in an apartment too large. Silence of a refrigerator full of food no one cooks with love. Absence of laughter, silly conversations, someone asking about your day, and genuinely caring. Robert climbed the 3 porch steps. His legs barely obeyed. He stopped at the wooden door, considering for one absurd moment just driving away. Maybe Helen had moved on, found someone who knew her worth. The thought of another man here, drinking coffee with her on cool mornings, made his stomach churn. But he had no right to jealousy. He'd thrown everything away. He raised his hand. It trembled before finally knocking. 3 soft knocks, almost timid. So different from the man who used to enter boardrooms like he owned the world. Footsteps from inside. Light, measured. Robert held his breath. The door opened. There she was, Helen, but not the Helen he'd left. That woman had worn tired eyes, nervous hands, the weight of rejection she didn't understand. That Helen had looked at him as if he were her only validation. This woman was different. Hair shorter, silver strands she didn't bother hiding. Skin bronzed from sun, simple cotton blouse, work pants stained with soil, gardening trowel in hand. But her eyes shocked him most. No hatred. No bitterness, no dramatic surprise, only serenity. Deep peace he hadn't known was possible. Like she was looking at an old acquaintance, not the man who'd destroyed her dreams. "Robert," she said, voice calm, almost gentle. What a surprise. His mouth opened, but no sound came. All those rehearsed words evaporated. He just stood there, staring like it was the first time. And in a way, it was. He finally managed. I needed to see you. Helen tilted her head, studying him, not with judgment but genuine curiosity. Are you all right? Real concern in her voice. After everything, after all the pain he'd caused, she was worried about him. That felt like a gut punch. No, Robert admitted, voice breaking. No, I'm not all right. Helen stayed silent for what felt like forever. Robert expected her to slam the door. Expected screams, tears, accusations. Expected anything except what she did. Come in, she said simply, opening the door wider. I made lemonade earlier. Should still be cold. Robert hesitated, completely thrown by her naturalness, like he hadn't left 5 years ago, hadn't shattered her heart. Helen, Come in, Robert, she repeated, firmer this time. Not cruel, just certain. Like she knew exactly what she was doing while he was completely lost. He entered. The house inside was even more welcoming. Simple but well-maintained furniture. Light curtains filtering sun softly. Books stacked everywhere. A guitar in the corner. Fresh bread smell from the kitchen. So different from his minimalist apartment where everything was designer and nothing had soul. Sit down, Helen gestured to the solid wood table. Let me wash up and bring the lemonade. Robert obeyed, feeling out of place. He watched Helen move through the kitchen with quiet grace, washing hands, drying on an embroidered towel, taking a glass pitcher from the fridge. Each movement measured, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. She placed 2 glasses on the table and poured. Robert noticed her hands. Different now. More calloused, stronger. Hands that work the earth, build things. The lemons are from here, Helen said, sitting across from him. Planted 3 trees a few years back. Producing well now. You grow all this? Robert asked, looking through the window at organized gardens. Most of it. Trade some with neighbors. Mrs. Martha has incredible tomatoes. Mr. John keeps bees, gives me honey. Small community, but everyone helps each other. Robert sipped the lemonade. Perfect. Sweet just right. Tart how he'd always liked. Helen remembered. You rebuilt everything, he said, unable to hide his admiration. I didn't rebuild, Helen corrected gently. I built something new, different. Mine. Mine hung in the air. Not accusation, but affirmation. She'd created a life that was hers alone, needing no one's validation. Helen, I need to tell you. You don't need to say anything right now, she interrupted, without harshness. You just got here. You're tired. Drink your lemonade. Breathe. There it was. Simple compassion he didn't deserve. She could have demanded explanations, could have thrown all the suffering in his face, could have punished him 1,000 ways. Instead, she offered cold lemonade and time to breathe. Robert felt tears finally spill. 5 years of empty success, lonely nights, meaningless achievements. Everything rushed out at once. I made the biggest mistake of my life, he whispered, voice choked. The biggest mistake. Helen didn't respond immediately. Just watched him cry, no satisfaction in her eyes. Only understanding. I know, she finally said. I know, Robert. Silence settled between them. Dense, heavy, with everything unsaid. Robert wiped his face. Helen stood, grabbed a clean dish towel and extended it without a word. This simple gesture, offering something to dry his tears instead of judging, made his chest tighten more. Thank you, he murmured. Helen returned to her chair, sipping lemonade, eyes fixed on the window where afternoon sun was turning golden. Robert truly observed her. Wrinkles around her eyes deeper now, but carved by smiles, not tears. Shoulders that used to curve under insecurity were now straight, confident. You're different, he said. People change, Helen responded, quiet philosophy in her voice. Especially when they need to. Did you need to change? She smiled sideways. I needed to discover who I was without you. Discovered I liked that person. That should have hurt, but there was such peace in how she said it that Robert couldn't feel anger. Only deep sadness for everything lost. A rooster crowed outside. Helen glanced at the wooden clock, her grandmother's antique. I need to check the greenhouse, she said, standing. Irrigation problem to fix before dark. Robert didn't know what to do. Sitting while she worked seemed absurd. Leaving without saying everything he came to say was unthinkable. Can I help? Words came out before he could think. Helen looked genuinely surprised. You want to help? I don't know anything about farming, he admitted, feeling ridiculous in his dusty designer suit. But I can learn. Carry things. Whatever you need. She studied him. Something passed through her eyes. Memory, hesitation, then nodded slowly. All right, but you'll need to change. I don't want you ruining that expensive suit. She walked to a small closet. Should be some old clothes that'll fit. When she opened it, Robert's heart skipped. His own clothes. Work shirts from weekends when they lived together. Faded jeans he thought he'd taken. Helen grabbed a blue plaid shirt and jeans. These should still fit. You kept my clothes? Almost a whisper. Helen shrugged, slight flush on her neck. Didn't make sense throwing them away. I ended up wearing them sometimes for garden work. The image of Helen in his old shirts did something strange to his stomach. Too intimate, too painful. Bathrooms there. When Robert entered, he saw crocheted towels, lavender scent. Only feminine products on the shelf. No sign of male presence. At least in this, guilty relief. She was alone. He changed quickly, surprised how those old clothes felt more comfortable than expensive suits. Looking in the mirror, he saw a man he didn't completely recognize. More human this way. Less executive, more just. Robert. Helen was already on the porch in rubber boots. She glanced at him, something sparking in her eyes. Nostalgia? Pain? But it passed too quickly. Let's go. About an hour before sundown. Robert followed across the property. Ground still warm from afternoon sun. A smell he hadn't experienced in years. Wet earth, green leaves, life growing. The greenhouse was simple, but well built. Inside, organized rows of seedlings at different growth stages. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Everything carefully labeled with handmade tags. You did all this yourself? Genuinely impressed. Mr. John helped with the structure. Rest I learned as I went. Helen examined irrigation pipes, checking for problems. You always wanted a garden, Robert remembered. I did, Helen confirmed without looking up. But you said we didn't have time. More practical to buy at the market. Accusation there, gentle but present. Robert swallowed hard. I was an idiot. You were ambitious, Helen corrected. Not the same thing. Just your ambition didn't leave room for anything else. She found the problem. Small hole in a tube. Grabbed special tape. Began repairing. Let me ask you something, Helen said while working. Did you get everything you wanted? All those important things? I got more than I imagined, Robert admitted. Company grew. More money than I know what to do with. And did it make you happy? Simple question. Complex answer. Robert stayed silent so long, Helen finally stopped and looked at him. No, he said. Didn't make me happy for even a second. Helen nodded slowly, like she already knew. Returned to the pipe, hands trembling slightly. Not nervousness, something deeper. Hold here, she asked, indicating part of the pipe. Need to tighten this connection. Robert obeyed. His hands met hers briefly. Touch electric, familiar, devastating. They worked silently until repair was complete. Helen tested it. Water flowed perfectly through irrigation lines. Done, she said with satisfaction. They left the greenhouse together. Sun already painting sky orange and pink. Helen walked to a small wooden bench under a tree, sat with a tired sigh. Robert hesitated before sitting beside her, maintaining respectful distance. There's something I need to ask, Helen said, eyes on the horizon. Why did you come back? After so long, why now? Robert took a deep breath. The question he knew would come. Because I woke up one morning and realized I had 50 meetings scheduled but not one real friend. Closed the biggest contract of my life with no one to celebrate with. Everything I built feels hollow and meaningless. He paused, voice failing. Because I realized the only time I was truly happy was when I was with you, and I threw it away because I was young, stupid, and thought I knew what I wanted. Helen didn't respond immediately, just kept watching sunset. Robert couldn't read her expression. Do you think you can turn back time? She finally asked, old sadness in her voice. Think you can just show up and things go back to how they were? No, Robert said honestly. I know I destroyed everything. No, I have no right to ask for anything. Just needed you to know I was wrong. You weren't too small for my dreams. My dreams were too small to understand what really matters. Helen turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. Different tears, not desperation or abandonment. Tears of someone who'd already cried everything and now just felt sadness of what could have been. In that moment, sitting on that simple bench watching sunset over Tennessee hills, Robert understood something profound. He hadn't just lost a wife 5 years ago. He'd lost himself. And maybe, just maybe, this woman who'd transformed herself from the ashes could teach him how to find his way back to who he was meant to be. The question was, would she want to? The silence that followed Robert's confession felt thick enough to touch. Helen stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from her work pants. Her movements were deliberate, measured. "It's getting dark," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "You must be exhausted from the drive." Robert nodded, throat too tight to speak. He'd expected anger, demands, confrontation. This calm acceptance was somehow harder. "The guest room is ready," Helen continued, walking toward the house. "Always keep it made up. Mrs. Martha's daughter visits sometimes when she's having trouble with her husband." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, made Robert's chest ache. She'd built an entire life here, a life that functioned perfectly well without him. Inside, Helen led him down the narrow hallway. She paused at a door, hand resting on the knob. Robert noticed the slight tremor in her fingers before she turned it. "Bathroom's across the hall," she said, stepping aside. "Towels are in the cabinet. I'll leave some clothes outside the door for tomorrow." "Helen, breakfast is at 6, she interrupted, still not looking directly at him. "Rooster doesn't care if you're tired." Then she was gone, footsteps soft down the hallway. Robert heard her bedroom door click shut, not slammed, just closed. He stood in the small guest room, taking it in. Simple wooden bed with a handmade quilt, lace curtains, a painting of wildflowers in a mason jar. Everything clean, welcoming but impersonal. A room for guests who would leave. Robert sat on the bed, and for the first time in years, let himself really cry. Deep, shaking sobs from somewhere he didn't know still existed. He cried for the fool he'd been, for the woman he'd thrown away, for all those empty years chasing things that didn't matter. When he finally lay down, still in his borrowed clothes, exhaustion pulled him under, and he slept deeper than he had in 5 years. Morning came with the rooster's crow, sharp, insistent, refusing to be ignored. Robert opened his eyes to unfamiliar shadows, a moment of panic before memory returned. He was here, at Helen's. She'd let him stay. Pale light filtered through lace curtains. He could hear sounds from elsewhere. Water running, soft clink of dishes, footsteps moving with purpose. Helen was already up. Outside his door he found clothes. More of his old things, a faded green work shirt, worn jeans, thick socks. He dressed quickly, caught his reflection in the small mirror. The man looking back seemed younger somehow, or maybe just more honest. Following the smell of fresh coffee, he found the kitchen. Helen stood at the stove, back to him, hair twisted in a simple bun. She wore a floral dress, an apron tied at her waist. Morning light caught the silver in her hair, made it shine. "Morning," he said softly. She glanced over her shoulder. "Coffee's on the table. Eggs will be ready in a minute." No, good morning. No smile. Just practical communication. Robert poured coffee from the old percolator, the same one they'd received as a wedding gift. His hands remembered its weight, the slight wobble of the handle. He sat, watching her work, cracking eggs one-handed into the cast-iron skillet, flipping them at exactly the right moment, sliding them onto plates already set with toast and sliced tomatoes. There was a confidence now that hadn't existed before, a sureness that came from years of depending on no one. Helen set a plate before him, then took the chair across. Not beside him, like she used to. Across. The distance wasn't accidental. "Thank you," Robert said. She nodded, already cutting into her eggs. They ate in silence broken only by the clink of forks on plates, the soft tick of the kitchen clock. Robert forced himself not to fill the quiet with nervous chatter. When they finished, she stood and began clearing. Robert jumped up. "Let me help." Helen hesitated, plate in hand, then shrugged. "Wash, I'll dry." They worked side by side at the deep farmhouse sink. Robert's hands remembered this ritual, the easy rhythm they used to have. But Helen didn't hum like she used to, didn't bump his hip with hers playfully, Just dried each dish methodically and stacked them away. "What do you need done today?" Robert asked when the last dish was put away. Helen folded the dish towel precisely. "Need to check the tomato plants. Some looked like they might have blight yesterday. Then I'm making preserves for Mrs. Martha. She's having her grandkids visit next week. Can I help?" She studied him for a long moment. "Garden's hot this time of morning. You're not used to that kind of work. I want to learn." Another pause. Then, "All right, but keep a hat on. Sun's stronger than you remember." The tomato plants stretched in neat rows, leaves heavy with morning dew. Helen moved between them like she was visiting old friends, touching leaves gently, checking undersides, murmuring to herself. Robert followed, trying not to feel useless. "See here?" Helen pointed to a leaf with brown spots spreading from the center. "That's blight. Have to remove it before it spreads to the whole plant." She demonstrated, pinching off affected leaves with steady fingers, dropping them in a bucket. Robert watched the care she took. "You really love this," he said quietly. Helen didn't look up. "It's honest work. Plant seeds, water them, watch them grow. They don't lie. Don't pretend to be something they're not. If you take care of them, they produce. If you neglect them, they die. Simple." The words hung between them, and Robert knew she wasn't just talking about plants. They worked until the sun climbed high and sweat ran down Robert's back. His hands cramped. His knees ached from crouching. But every time he thought about complaining, he'd glance at Helen, steady, patient, unbothered, and kept going. "That's enough," she finally said, straightening with a hand to her lower back. "Need to get those preserves started." Back in the kitchen, Helen pulled out jars and filled a pot with water to boil. Robert washed tomatoes, watching as she worked with the same focused attention she'd given the garden. "Mrs. Martha taught me this," Helen said, stirring the pot. "First summer I was here, I didn't know anything. She showed up one day with a basket of tomatoes and said, 'These'll go bad if we don't preserve them. Come on.'" Robert heard the affection in her voice. "She sounds special." "She is. When I first came here, I was pretty broken." Helen's hand stilled on the spoon, just for a moment. "Cried every day for months. Didn't know how to be alone. Mrs. Martha would show up with projects. Jam making, quilting, gardening. Never said much about it. Just kept me busy until I could breathe again." "I'm sorry," Robert whispered. Helen resumed stirring. "Don't be sorry. Be different." The words were simple but hit like a hammer. Not apologies, change. Not words, actions. "I'm trying," he said. She glanced at him then, really looked at him for the first time since breakfast. Something softened in her expression, just slightly. "I can see that." That afternoon, Helen announced they were taking preserves to Mrs. Martha. Robert expected a short walk, but Helen led him down a dusty road that curved through woods and pastures. The heat was relentless. Cicadas screamed from the trees. They walked in comfortable silence until Helen spoke. "Mrs. Martha's husband died 3 years ago. Heart attack while he was feeding the chickens. She found him an hour later." Robert felt the weight of that image. That must have been terrible. It was. Still is some days. Helen shifted the basket she carried. "But she gets up every morning, feeds those same chickens, tends his garden, keeps living even when part of her died with him." She said it like a lesson, though Robert wasn't sure what he was supposed to learn. Mrs. Martha's house was smaller than Helen's, paint peeling, porch sagging slightly, but flower boxes exploded with color under every window. Wind chimes made of old silverware sang in the breeze. "Helen!" A tiny woman emerged, arms outstretched. She barely reached Helen's shoulder but hugged her with fierce strength. "And who's this?" "This is Robert," Helen said carefully. "He's visiting for a while." "Mrs." Martha's sharp eyes moved from Helen to Robert and back. Robert saw understanding dawn in her weathered face. She knew exactly who he was. "Well," she said, releasing Helen and crossing her arms. "Visiting." The single word held volumes. Judgment, curiosity, protection. "Yes, ma'am," Robert said quietly. "Just visiting." Mrs. Martha studied him another long moment, then nodded. "Come in then. Got fresh tea." Inside was dim and cool. Photographs covered every surface, a lifetime documented. Mrs. Martha in a wedding dress, young and laughing. The same woman holding babies, then children, then teenagers. Always beside a tall man with kind eyes. The last photo showed them elderly, still holding hands. 52 years, Mrs. Martha said, seeing Robert look. Not all of them easy, some downright hard. But we chose each other every single day. That's what matters. The choosing. She poured tea into mason jars, handed them around like communion. Robert sipped, tasting mint and sweetness. Helen tells me you've been gone a while, Mrs. Martha said, settling into a rocking chair that creaked. 5 years. Long time. World changes in 5 years. People change. Yes, ma'am. Question is, Mrs. Martha leaned forward, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Have you changed? Or just your circumstances? Robert felt Helen's attention shift to him, felt the weight of both women waiting. He could lie, could give the answer they wanted. But Mrs. Martha would see through it. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I know I want to be different. I know the man I was 5 years ago was a fool. But wanting to change and actually changing, he shook his head. I guess time will tell. Mrs. Martha rocked back, something like approval in her smile. At least you're honest. That's a start. She turned to Helen. What do you think, dear? Is he worth the trouble? Helen's hands tightened around her mason jar. Robert saw her throat work. I think people deserve a chance to prove who they really are. Not who they were, not who they say they'll be, who they actually are in the quiet moments when nobody's watching. Wise, Mrs. Martha said. Very wise. She stood, joints cracking. Now I've got something to show you both. She led them to a bedroom at the back. Inside was a massive quilt stretched across a frame, half finished. Hundreds of small squares in every color imaginable, stitched together in an intricate pattern. Started this after Henry died, Mrs. Martha said, running a gnarled hand over the fabric. Every square is a memory. This blue, his favorite shirt. This green, my garden dress. This red, tablecloth from our first Christmas. She pointed to square after square. Thought I was making something to remember him. But what I'm really making is proof that our life together mattered, that it was real, that love doesn't disappear just because a person does. Robert felt his eyes sting. Beside him, Helen wiped away a tear. Point is, Mrs. Martha continued, life is made of small moments stitched together, not the big dramatic ones, the everyday choosing, the morning coffee, the held hand, the forgiven mistake. She looked at Robert. You want to prove you've changed? Prove it in the small moments. That's where truth lives. They left soon after, walking back in silence, heavy with thought. The sun was lowering, painting everything gold. Robert's mind kept returning to that quilt. Hundreds of tiny pieces making something beautiful. She's right, you know, Helen said suddenly. About the small moments. I know. I don't need grand gestures, Robert. Don't need you to buy me things or make big promises. She stopped walking, turned to face him. I need to see who you are when you're tired, when things are hard, when nobody's watching and there's nothing to gain. I understand. Do you? Her voice was soft, but intense, because I spent years being the person you wanted me to be. Shrinking myself to fit your idea of success. I won't do that again. Not for anyone. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Robert took a shaky breath. A chance to know you. The real you. The woman you've become. And maybe a chance to show you who I can be when I'm not trying to prove anything. When I'm just here, present, real. Helen searched his face for a long time. Dusk gathered around them, crickets beginning their evening song. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life continued, indifferent to their small human drama. Okay, she finally said, but I can't promise anything. I'm not asking for promises, just time. She nodded slowly, then continued walking. Robert followed, and though she didn't take his hand, didn't move closer, something had shifted. Some small door had opened, just a crack. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't trust, but it was possibility. And right now, that was enough. That night, lying in the guest room listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, Robert thought about Mrs. Martha's quilt, all those small squares stitched together with patient hands. He'd spent 5 years chasing big moments, big successes, big achievements, and he'd ended up with nothing but emptiness. Maybe what he needed now was to learn the value of small things, the morning coffee, the shared work, the quiet moment at day's end. Maybe life wasn't about dramatic gestures, but the gentle, persistent choosing. Day after day after day. He fell asleep, wondering if he had the patience for that kind of living, if he could slow down enough to stitch a life worth keeping. Tomorrow he'd find out. Days began to blur together in the most beautiful way. Not the empty blur of Robert's city life, where one meaningless meeting bled into another, but a rhythm, predictable, grounding, real. Each morning started the same. Roosters crow, coffee percolating. Helen already moving through the kitchen with that quiet efficiency that spoke of years doing this alone. Robert learned to wake earlier, to have coffee ready when she came in from feeding the chickens. She never thanked him, but he noticed she'd pause, just a heartbeat, before pouring her first cup. A small acknowledgement. One morning, Robert found her standing at the kitchen window, mug cradled in both hands, staring at something he couldn't see. Her shoulders were tense, jaw tight. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't turn. "Today would have been our anniversary, 15 years. The words hit Robert like cold water. He'd forgotten. Completely forgotten. "Helen, don't." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dry but haunted. "Don't apologize. Just let me feel it." So he did. He stood there, silent, while she grieved what they'd lost. After a long moment, she set down her mug and went outside. Robert watched her through the window, walking to the far edge of the property where wildflowers grew tall. She stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. When she came back, something had shifted in her face. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer. "I'm going to teach you to make bread today," she announced. "Can't have you living here eating my bread without learning the work it takes." Robert understood this for what it was. A distraction, yes, but also an invitation. She was letting him in, just a little more. Bread-making, Robert discovered, was meditation disguised as cooking. Helen showed him how to proof the yeast, testing the water temperature with her wrist like she was bathing a baby. How to fold the flour in gradually, not rushing, letting each addition incorporate fully before adding more. "You can't hurry dough," she said, her hands working the mixture with practiced rhythm. "It rises on its own time. Try to rush it and you'll ruin it. Patience is the only ingredient that really matters." Robert watched her knead, the push and fold, hypnotic, peaceful. "Here." She stepped aside. "Your turn." His first attempts were clumsy, too rough, then too gentle. The dough stuck to his hands, refused to cooperate. "You're fighting it," Helen observed. She moved behind him, her hands covering his. Robert's breath caught at the contact. The first time she'd voluntarily touched him since he'd arrived. "Feel it. Don't force. Guide." Her hands moved his through the motion. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. Her breath warm on his shoulder blade. The scent of her, lavender soap and something indefinably Helen, made his throat tight. "There," she said, stepping back. "You've got it." But Robert could still feel the ghost of her hands on his, could still feel the heat of her body behind him. He focused on the dough, trying to memorize the feeling, the rhythm, the rightness of it. They set the dough to rise, covered with a damp cloth, and Helen led him outside to weed the herb garden while they waited. Working side by side in the soil, Robert felt something loosening in his chest. Some knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Can I ask you something?" he said, pulling chickweed from between the oregano plants. "Maybe." "Why did you let me stay? Really?" Helen sat back on her heels, considering. A smudge of dirt marked her cheek. Robert resisted the urge to wipe it away. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." She pulled off her gardening gloves, studying her calloused palms. "Part of me wanted to slam that door in your face. Watch you drive away like you watched me in your rearview mirror all those years ago." Robert flinched at the image. "But another part," she trailed off, looking toward the mountains in the distance. "Another part saw something in your eyes I'd never seen before. Humility, maybe, or genuine pain. I don't know. I just knew that if I sent you away without giving you a chance to show me who you'd become, I'd wonder forever. And I was tired of wondering about you." "Are you still wondering?" "Less than I was." She met his eyes. "You're different than I expected. Not the arrogant man I built up in my mind, but also not—" She paused, choosing words carefully. Not entirely healed. You're wounded, Robert. I can see it. You're learning to live with it, but the wound's still there. And that matters? Of course it matters. Her voice was gentle but firm. I can't be with someone who's using me to heal. That's not love. That's need. And need runs out. The words sat heavy between them. Robert knew she was right. He was wounded, hollowed out by years of chasing emptiness. But was that why he was here? To heal? Or because he genuinely saw her worth now? He didn't know. And his uncertainty must have shown because Helen's expression softened. I'm not saying you need to have all the answers, she said. I'm just saying we both need to be honest about what this is, what it can be, what it might never be. The bread came out of the oven golden and perfect, filling the kitchen with warmth. Helen sliced it while still hot, steam rising from the soft interior. She handed Robert a piece slathered with butter that melted into the nooks and crannies. Taste, she commanded. He bit in, and flavor exploded, simple, pure, honest, made with their hands, their time, their patience. Good? Helen asked, but she was already smiling. She knew it was good. Perfect. They ate standing at the counter, not talking, just existing in the space they'd created together. Robert thought about Mrs. Martha's quilt. Small moments, stitched together. This was one of those moments. Would it be part of a larger pattern someday? Or just a single square that didn't connect to anything? That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A truck pulled up, and two men climbed out. One older, weathered like driftwood. One younger, maybe 30, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. John! Helen's face lit up in a way Robert hadn't seen. She actually ran to hug the older man. You didn't tell me you were coming. Wanted to surprise you, the old man said, voice gravelly but warm. Brought my nephew Daniel. He's visiting from Memphis. Thought he should meet the woman who saved my life. Oh, stop. Helen swatted at him, but she was blushing. She turned to the younger man. He's exaggerating. I just brought him some soup when he had the flu. She brought me soup every day for 2 weeks, Mr. John corrected. Cleaned my house, fed my chickens, wouldn't take a penny. He looked at Robert for the first time, assessment in his eyes. And who's this? This is Robert, Helen said, and Robert heard the hesitation before she added, my husband. Not ex-husband, just husband. Robert's heart stumbled. Mr. John's expression shifted through several emotions. Surprise, concern, protective anger. He looked at Helen. Your husband, he repeated slowly. It's complicated, Helen said quietly. I'll bet it is. Mr. John crossed his arms. Daniel looked uncomfortable, like he'd stumbled into family drama. Robert stepped forward, hand extended. I'm the fool who left 5 years ago. I'm back trying to earn a second chance I probably don't deserve. Mr. John didn't take his hand immediately, just studied him with eyes that had seen a lot of life and probably too much heartbreak. You hurt her, he said plainly. I did. Badly. Yes, sir. Why should I believe you won't do it again? You shouldn't. Robert dropped his hand. You should protect her. You should tell me to leave. You should do everything I wish someone had done for her 5 years ago, when I was too blind to see what I had. Something flickered in Mr. John's eyes. He glanced at Helen, who was watching this exchange with an unreadable expression. You love her? Mr. John asked. I'm learning to, Robert said honestly. Really love her. Not the selfish, small love I had before. The kind of love that puts her first. That sees her. That values her. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. Mr. John was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. That's the most honest answer you could have given. They shook, and Robert felt something pass between them. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. Man to man. One who'd learned wisdom the hard way, recognizing another who was trying to. Well, Daniel said, breaking the tension with a smile. This is quite the introduction. Nice to meet you both. Helen laughed, and the sound broke the remaining awkwardness. Come inside. I just made bread. We'll have coffee. Around the kitchen table, conversation flowed easier. Daniel was a teacher, passionate about literature, full of stories about his students. John told tales about his late wife Martha. Not Mrs. Martha, Robert realized, but a different Martha. They'd lost her to cancer, married 40 years. Miss her every day, Mr. John said simply, "but I'm grateful for every single one of those days, even the hard ones. Maybe especially the hard ones, because that's when you learn what you're made of, what love really means." Helen reached across and squeezed his weathered hand. The gesture was so natural, so full of genuine affection. This was her family now, Robert realized. This community she'd built. He was the outsider, the guest, the one on probation. After they left, Helen was quieter. She moved through the kitchen cleaning up, movements more mechanical than usual. "You okay?" Robert asked. Non-committal. "Helen." She stopped, hands gripping the edge of the sink. "Hearing you call yourself my husband, it was strange. I can stop. I can tell people—" "No." She turned to face him. "That's not what I meant. It was strange because part of me wanted it to be true, still wants it. After everything, after all the healing, all the independence, all the strength I've built, part of me still wants what we had, or what I thought we had." Her voice cracked. "And I hate that. I hate that I'm not completely over you, that you can still walk back into my life and make me feel things I thought I'd buried." Robert took a step toward her, then stopped, respecting her space. "Is that so terrible?" "Yes." Tears were rolling down her cheeks now. "Because I don't trust it. I don't trust these feelings. They made me weak before, made me lose myself. What if they do it again? What if they don't?" Robert said softly. "What if this time you're strong enough to feel them without losing yourself? What if I'm different enough not to ask you to?" Helen wiped her face roughly. "I don't know. I just don't know." She walked past him, out onto the porch. Robert heard the creak of the rocking chair. He wanted to follow, to comfort, to fix. But he was learning. Sometimes the most loving thing was to give space. So he finished the dishes, made fresh coffee, sliced more of that perfect bread. Then he carried it all outside and set it on the small table beside her chair. "I'll be in my room if you need anything," he said quietly. He was halfway to the door when she spoke. "Stay." Just one word, but it felt like everything. Robert sat in the other chair. They rocked in silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors. He didn't try to talk, didn't try to solve anything, just stayed, present, patient, and somehow that was enough. The weeks melted into each other like butter on warm bread. Robert's hands grew rougher, his body stronger. He could work a full morning in the garden without his back screaming. Could repair a fence post without Mr. John hovering to make sure he didn't hurt himself. Could knead bread without Helen's guidance. But something was shifting beneath the surface. Robert felt it in the way Helen would sometimes look at him across the dinner table, her eyes holding questions she didn't ask. In the way she'd start to reach for his hand during their evening porch sits, then pull back at the last second. In the silences that were no longer comfortable but charged with everything unsaid. One morning, Robert woke to find Helen already gone. No coffee made, no note. Just emptiness where her presence usually anchored the day. He found her at the far edge of the property, sitting in the wildflowers she'd stood among on their anniversary. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primal. Robert approached slowly, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. "Helen?" She didn't turn. "I can't do this." The words froze him mid-step. "Can't do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely between them. "You being here, us pretending like we can just pick up pieces and glue them back together. It's not working." "What happened? What changed?" Helen finally looked at him, and her face was ravaged. "I woke up this morning and realized I was happy. Actually happy. And it terrified me, because the last time I let myself be happy with you, you left. You just left. Helen, let me finish." Her voice was firm despite the tears. "I've spent years building a life where I don't need anyone, where I'm enough all by myself. And you come back and suddenly I'm forgetting what that feels like. I'm planning things with you in them, thinking about futures that include you. And what happens when you remember that your real life is back in the city? When you get bored of playing farmer? When you realize that ambition you buried is still there, just sleeping?" Robert felt his own eyes burning. "That's not going to happen." "You don't know that." Helen stood, agitation making her movements sharp. "You don't know who you are yet. You're running from something, Robert. Running from the emptiness you created. But running toward me isn't the same as choosing me. And I won't be your consolation prize again." The words hit like physical blows. Robert wanted to argue, to promise, to swear he'd changed. But hadn't he done that before? Hadn't he promised forever once already? "You're right," he said quietly. Helen blinked, clearly expecting a fight. "What?" "You're right. I don't know who I am yet. I'm figuring it out. And it's not fair to ask you to wait while I do." Something crumpled in Helen's expression. "So you're leaving?" "No." Robert took a careful step closer. "I'm saying you're right to be scared. You're right to protect yourself. You're right that I need to figure out who I am, separate from running away and separate from running to you." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I'm not leaving unless you tell me to. I'm going to stay and figure out who Robert is when he's not trying to prove anything, when he's just living. And if that man is someone you can love, then maybe we'll have something real. And if he's not, then at least we'll both know." Helen searched his face for a long time. The morning sun was climbing, burning away the dew, making everything too bright. Birds sang their territorial songs. Life continued around their small human drama. "I don't know if I can survive losing you again," she whispered. "Then don't let yourself get lost in me. Keep being Helen, the strong, independent, whole Helen. I don't want the woman who needed me. I want the woman who doesn't need me but might choose me anyway." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, loving someone without consuming them. But I'm trying to learn." Helen wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I need some time alone today." "Okay, maybe a few days." Robert's stomach dropped, but he nodded. "Whatever you need. There's a cabin about a mile up the mountain. I go there sometimes when I need to think. I'll be back when I'm ready. Should I? Just take care of the garden. Feed the chickens. The bread recipe is on the counter." She was already walking, not toward the house but toward a trail that led up into the woods. Robert watched her go, every instinct screaming to follow, to fix, to not let her walk away. But he'd spent too many years following his instincts, and they'd led him wrong. So he stayed, watched her figure grow smaller between the trees until she disappeared completely. The first day alone was the hardest. The house felt too quiet. Robert caught himself listening for Helen's footsteps, her humming, the small sounds that marked her presence. He threw himself into work, weeding the garden with almost violent intensity, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing the barn. Mr. John stopped by in the afternoon. He took one look at Robert and said, "She went to the cabin." "How did you? Been knowing Helen for 5 years. She goes there when she needs to wrestle with something. Usually comes back stronger." He studied Robert. "Question is, will she come back alone?" "I don't know." "You love her?" "I'm learning what that word really means." Mr. John nodded slowly. "That's more honest than most men can manage." He pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. "My Martha wrote this before she died. Want you to read it." Robert unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Love isn't what happens when everything is easy. It's what you choose when everything is hard. It's showing up when you want to run. It's staying soft when the world makes you hard. It's choosing someone's growth over your own comfort. If you can do that, you've learned what love really is. If you can't, at least you're honest enough not to pretend." Robert's vision blurred. "Thank you for showing me this. Don't thank me. Just live it." Mr. John headed for his truck, then turned back. "One more thing. Helen's been alone a long time. She's forgotten it's okay to need someone. Might need reminding that choosing to be with someone isn't the same as needing them to survive." After he left, Robert sat on the porch with Martha's words. Read them over and over until they were memorized. Love is what you choose when everything is hard. Everything was hard right now. Helen was gone. The future was uncertain. Every old instinct told him to leave, to protect himself, to run before he could be rejected. But he stayed. The second day brought rain. Heavy, drenching rain that turned the dirt roads to mud and kept Robert inside. He made bread, finding comfort in the ritual Helen had taught him. Proof the yeast, fold the flour, knead with patience, let it rise on its own time. While the bread baked, Robert wandered the house, really seeing it for the first time. Every corner told a story of Helen's rebuilding. books on sustainable farming, stacked beside poetry collections, photographs of her with community members, laughing at a church potluck, arm in arm with Mrs. Martha, helping at what looked like a school event, a life rich with connection, with purpose, with joy. Had he ever seen her this happy when they were together before? Robert tried to remember and couldn't. She'd always seemed slightly dimmed around him, like she was turning down her own light so his could shine brighter. The realization made him sick. In her bedroom, the door was open. An invitation, or just forgotten, he wasn't sure. Robert saw more evidence of her transformation. A sketch pad filled with drawings. Wildflowers mostly, rendered in careful detail. Some watercolored, others just pencil. They were beautiful, talented. "I didn't know you could draw," he said aloud to the empty room, because he hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't cared about what she dreamed of doing when she wasn't busy supporting his dreams. Robert sat on the edge of her bed, neatly made, quilt tucked with hospital corners, and let himself feel the full weight of his past selfishness. Not to wallow, but to really understand, to see clearly what he'd done and who he'd been. The man who'd left had been so focused on his own journey that he'd never once asked Helen about hers, had never wondered what she wanted beyond being his wife, had never considered that she might be an entire person separate from his needs. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the quiet room. "I'm so sorry I never saw you." The third day, Helen came back. Robert was in the garden, harvesting tomatoes in the morning cool, when he heard footsteps. He turned, and there she was. Muddy boots, wind-blown hair, eyes clearer than he'd seen them. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi." Robert set down his basket, resisted the urge to run to her. "You okay?" "I am." She walked closer, and he noticed new resolve in her posture. "I had a lot of time to think. And I realized I've been protecting myself so much that I've forgotten how to be vulnerable. I've been so afraid of losing myself again that I haven't let myself really be present with you." She stopped a few feet away. "But I also realized something else." "What?" "You're not the same man who left. I keep waiting for that man to reappear. Keep bracing for it. But he's not coming back, is he?" "No," Robert said with certainty. "He's not. So I need to stop punishing you for his mistakes. Need to see who you actually are now, not who you used to be." She smiled tentatively. "Think we could try that? Fresh start. No ghosts." Robert felt something crack open in his chest. "I'd like that." "Good." Helen picked up the basket of tomatoes. "Because we've got preserves to make and I could use the help." They walked back to the house together. Not hand in hand, not yet, but side by side, equal. Two people choosing to try, choosing the hard work of real love. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Robert felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The fresh start wasn't magic, wasn't instant healing. It was small, deliberate steps toward each other, with plenty of stumbles along the way. Robert learned Helen took her coffee with a splash of cream now, not black like she used to. That she loved thunderstorms but hated the humidity after. That she'd grown to enjoy silence more than conversation, but when she did talk, her words carried weight they never had before. Helen learned Robert had nightmares sometimes, waking gasping, reaching for something he couldn't name, that he was genuinely afraid of failing again, of becoming that hollow man, that underneath the expensive clothes and city polish, he'd been desperate and dying and hadn't even known it. They worked side by side most days, Helen teaching, Robert learning, how to tell when the corn was ready, how to stake tomatoes properly, how to listen to the land and what it needed. But really, she was teaching him something bigger, how to be present, how to value the unseen work, how to measure success in growth rather than acquisition. One afternoon, Helen mentioned she needed to check on Mr. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who lived alone. "Want to come along?" she asked, and Robert heard the test in the question. Of course. They walked the winding path to a small house that had seen better days. Paint peeling, porch boards warped, garden overgrown. An old hound dog lifted its head as they approached, tail wagging weakly. "Hey there, Duke," Helen said softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. She knocked on the door. "Mr. Peterson, it's Helen." Shuffling footsteps. The door opened to reveal a man who seemed made of bones and papery skin. His hands trembled on the door frame. Helen. His voice was thin but warm. Wasn't expecting you today. Brought some fresh bread and soup. Helen held up her basket. And someone I want you to meet. This is Robert. Mr. Peterson's roomy eyes studied Robert. Your husband? Yes, sir. Heard you were back. The old man stepped aside. Well, come in then. The inside was dim, cluttered with a lifetime of accumulated things. Newspapers stacked in corners, photographs covering every surface. The air smelled of age and loneliness and memories. Sit, sit. Mr. Peterson gestured to a worn sofa. I'll make us some… You'll do no such thing, Helen interrupted gently. You sit, let me. Robert watched Helen move through the old man's kitchen like she'd done this 100 times, finding dishes, heating soup, slicing bread. Mr. Peterson sank into his recliner with a grateful sigh. She's an angel, this one, he said to Robert. Don't know what I'd do without her. How long have you known Helen? Robert asked. Since she first came here. I was having trouble with my heart medications. Couldn't read the labels anymore. Couldn't remember which pills when. She showed up one day, organized everything for me. Comes by twice a week to check on me. His eyes grew misty. My daughter's in California. Can't get out here much. Helen's been… well, she's been like family. Helen returned with a tray. 3 bowls of soup, bread still warm. She set it down and Robert noticed something that made his heart stop. Mr. Peterson's hands were shaking too badly to hold the spoon. Without a word, without making it a thing, Helen sat beside him. She picked up the spoon, filled it with soup, and lifted it to the old man's lips. Now I can feed myself, Mr. Peterson protested weakly. I know you can, Helen said, her voice infinitely gentle. But today, let me do this for you. You spent yesterday helping Mrs. Chen with her yard work. Everyone deserves to be cared for sometimes. And she fed him, spoonful by spoonful, talking between bites about the garden, about the weather, about nothing and everything, making it not about his frailty but about companionship, about choosing to serve someone simply because they mattered. Robert couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch this woman, his wife, though he'd never deserved that title, showing more grace in this simple act than he'd shown in his entire life. There was no audience here, no cameras, no recognition, no reward. Just Helen and an old man who couldn't hold a spoon steady, and love expressed in the most basic, profound way possible. When Mr. Peterson had eaten, Helen cleaned up while Robert sat with him. The old man was getting drowsy, medications kicking in. You're a lucky man, Mr. Peterson said quietly. I'm beginning to understand that. Don't just understand it. The old man's eyes were sharp despite his fatigue. Live it, show it, every single day. Outside, walking home, Robert was silent. Helen glanced at him several times but didn't push. Finally, he stopped walking, turned to face her. I need to tell you something. Helen's expression grew guarded. Okay. Watching you with Mr. Peterson. His voice cracked. I finally understood what I lost. Not just you. Not just our marriage. I lost the chance to be part of something real. Something that matters. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he didn't wipe them away. All those years, I was chasing success, building an empire, measuring my worth in money and power and recognition. And you were right here, trying to show me that worth is measured in moments like what I just witnessed, in showing up for people who can't repay you, in feeding someone who can't feed themselves, not because you have to, but because you choose to. Helen's own eyes were glistening. I thought I was too big for this life, Robert continued. Too ambitious for small-town living, for quiet days, for simple acts of service. But the truth is, I was too small. My dreams were too small. My understanding of what matters was too small. My heart was too small. He took a shaky breath. You didn't get smaller when I left. I did. You grew into this extraordinary woman who understands what it means to really live, to really love, to really matter. And I shrank into someone who had everything and was nothing. Robert, I'm not asking you to take me back, he said quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And you're the most incredible person I've ever known. You've taught me what strength really looks like, what love really means. what success actually is. Helen was crying now too, silent tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "When I drove up to this house that first day, I was so arrogant," Robert said. "I thought I was coming back to save you, to rescue you from this small life. But you're the one who saved me. You showed me what it means to be human." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of pain and healing and possibility. "I don't need you," Helen finally said, and Robert's heart cracked. "I don't need you to survive, or to be happy, or to feel whole." She stepped closer, and Robert saw something shift in her expression. Something open, vulnerable, brave. "But I choose you anyway," she whispered. "Not because you complete me. Not because I can't live without you. But because I like who we're becoming together. Because you're learning what I had to learn the hard way. That real life isn't in the spotlight or the success. It's in the quiet moments. The held hand. The shared work. The choice to show up even when it's hard. Helen, I'm not the woman you married," she continued. "I'm not going to shrink myself for you. Not going to make your dreams more important than mine. Not going to lose myself again. I don't want you to. And you're not the man I married either. You're someone who's learning to see beyond himself, who's learning to value what's real instead of what's impressive, who's learning that the smallest acts can be the most profound." She took his hands, and the touch was electric, grounding, real. "So here's what I'm offering," Helen said. "Not a return to what was, but a chance to build something new, together. Two whole people choosing each other, not because we need to, but because we want to, because we're better together. But complete apart." "Yes," Robert breathed. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Helen smiled, and it was like sunrise. "Then let's start now. Today. This moment. No more looking back. No more guilt or regret. Just forward." "Forward," Robert agreed. They kissed then, and it was nothing like their first kiss all those years ago. That had been passion and promise and youthful certainty. This was deeper, richer, earned through pain and growth and choosing. A kiss that tasted of tears and hope and hard-won wisdom. Months passed. The seasons turned. Robert sold his company, donated most of the money to community causes Helen cared about, kept enough to buy the property next to Helen's, where he started a small woodworking business making furniture by hand. Simple, honest work that let him create beauty without consuming his soul. They didn't remarry. Didn't need a ceremony to prove what they both knew. They were committed, choosing each other daily, building a life that honored both of them. Robert learned to find joy in the smallest things. Morning coffee on the porch, bread rising in the bowl, the first tomato of the season, Helen's laugh when he told a terrible joke, the way she'd absently touch his shoulder when passing. These moments, he realized, were what Mrs. Martha had meant. Life stitched together from small squares of genuine connection. One evening, sitting on the porch as fireflies began their dance, Helen leaned against Robert's shoulder. "You know what I've learned?" she said softly. "What?" "That sometimes the greatest growth comes from the deepest pain. That losing yourself can be the first step to finding yourself. That real love isn't about needing someone. It's about choosing them, even when you don't need them." Robert kissed the top of her head. "Wise woman. I had a good teacher." She smiled up at him. Life itself. They rocked in comfortable silence, and Robert thought about the man who'd driven up that dusty road months ago. Desperate, broken, chasing something he couldn't name. That man was gone. In his place was someone simpler, deeper, more real. Someone who understood that the most extraordinary life was built from ordinary moments lived with intention. Someone who knew that love wasn't about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was about showing up, being present, feeding someone who couldn't feed themselves, not for recognition, but because they mattered. It was Helen teaching him to bake bread, sharing her community, showing him what it meant to belong. It was Mr. Peterson's trembling hands and Helen's steady ones. It was Mrs. Martha's quilt of memories, each square precious not for its size, but for its truth. "Thank you," Robert said into the gathering darkness. "For what? For letting me come back. For giving me a chance to become someone worth being. For showing me what really matters." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then, "You did the hardest part. You chose to change. Most people never do. Most people never get a second chance. Then I guess we're both lucky. The fireflies glowed brighter as night deepened. Somewhere a whippoorwill called. The world spun on, indifferent and eternal. And two people who had lost each other and found themselves sat together, grateful for the pain that had led them here, to this moment, to this truth. Real life isn't measured in achievements or acquisitions. It's measured in presence, in showing up, in choosing to see and value what's real over what's impressive, in understanding that the smallest acts of love are often the most profound. And sometimes, the greatest journey we can take isn't toward success or recognition or power. It's toward becoming fully human, flawed, present, real, and brave enough to love without consuming, to give without taking, to choose without needing. That's what Robert had learned. That's what Helen had always known. And together, in their small corner of Tennessee, they were living proof that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be.